You're listening to the podcast Coffee with Mike and Julie, Libertarians Talk Psychology. This is current commentary from an MBA businessman and a PhD psychologist.
Look what they done to my song.
I want to talk about Joe Biden's State of the Union address, where he talked about Ukraine and the United States economy. The whole speech helped me get in touch with how great our economic system is compared to the economic systems of other countries. That we still have a free market system,
Almost.
Even though we're sliding backwards. We still have a free market system of economics
Sorta.
and of business that is the secret to our country's success. I mean, the reason we are such a big, powerful country
Rich.
is because of our economic system and our system of people being able to make a lot of money and give money to different countries and causes and everything else. And these other countries are busy controlling their population.
Well, that's a very important point, and I want to encourage you to do a podcast on that, and let's prove that. Because a lot of people don't really believe that.
Well, let's just touch on it real quick. As you know, I use that index of economic freedom as a measure of freedom. And the United States...
And free market?
Free market.
Okay. So now, let me just orient myself here. The person that proved this was Milton Friedman. Would you say he was like the first person that said, the free market is better than any other arrangement? And here why, he would take a country and free to choose. He would show how a country functioned under a free market compared to a non-free market. So that's who we're relying on, really, for this.
I wouldn't say that this is overly dependent on Milton Friedman.
Okay,
no.
All right.
No, now Milton Friedman did contribute to this measure of economic freedom.
Okay.
But he was just a contributor.
Okay.
But the United States used to be in the top 5, if I remember right, when I first started paying attention to it.
To the Economic Freedom Index.
We have, through our politicians, we have slowly dropped from the top 5 to now we're finally down to number 20.
Oh, we're down to number 20.
Yeah.
That's
We're down
bad.
there with Malaysia, Chile.
Uh-oh.
And the countries that are doing really well, New Zealand and Australia, are in the top 5.
Well, that makes sense.
The United Kingdom is number 7. That we're a lot worse than the United Kingdom, and I never would have guessed that.
Oh my God, this is depressing news.
Canada is number 9.
Wait, Canada is number 9?
And here we are, number 20.
Well, I cannot believe that Canada beats us as socialist as they are. I have a friend in Canada, and she said the government just does anything they want to.
They keep in mind, every one of these countries has portions of their system that are very repressive. And we've seen Canada's repression with this
oppression,
with the trucker thing. They just
they came down on the truckers like they were criminals.
So you tend to think that they're what kind of country is that? And yet they are better than we are when it comes to economic freedom. They just have some other portions of their system are more free than ours.
Well, this would be good, and I don't know if you're going to talk about this today, but sometime we ought to talk about the elements of economic freedom that we're measuring.
Well, that's a good point. But Australia was terrible when it came to the mask mandate stuff. I mean, they were chasing people down and arresting them because they weren't wearing their masks.
Well, we were doing that in the United States. I mean, it was almost bizarre. It's like...
But the very last country... is no surprise. Well, and let me talk about
Russia.
That. No, but you won't be surprised. It's North Korea.
Well, yeah.
North Korea
Where does Russia fall?
I'll tell you, but of the 178 countries that this system ranks, North Korea is the very last. Cuba is down there, very close to them. Iran is down there. But I'm going to get Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, I would just hypothesize that Ukraine is not not that bad. Oh, did you hear the news yesterday? Russia agrees to a corridor to evacuate the civilians as long as the corridor goes to Russia or the other country, Belarus.
Oh, really?
Like, we'll evacuate the people fleeing the war zone, but only to our country and our best friend.
Wow, how about that? I didn't.
I mean, it's
that.
like, is this a joke?
So Ukraine is number 127, which is very low.
Yeah, okay, that's not good.
And Russia is number 92, which is low.
So Ukraine is lower than Russia.
Ukraine is even worse than Russia. But,
wow.
But of course, my point is, if you, and we've seen this before, we've seen a YouTube video that compares the economic index of economic freedom against how prosperous the country is. I mean, it's a good correlation between the two.
You know, that would be a good YouTube. I mean, there are YouTube videos that are really cool that have a moving rating of countries over the years. Mm-hmm. That is so cool. I forget what some of the names are, but that is so cool to watch the outcome. That's an outcome variable, and they've got it plotted.
Right.
And and then there's one with music that. Music is just so cool. I need to find that. We need to go over that. Okay.
So I want to play this Peter Schiff excerpt from his podcast. It's episode 784 of the Peter Schiff Show. But before I play that, I want to tell an economics joke.
All right.
Here's the joke. Is this confrontational kind of young woman is talking to an older man, and he's a smoker, and she doesn't like the fact that he's a smoker. So she's confronting him about his smoking. How many cigarettes do you smoke? I smoke a pack a day. Well, how long have you been smoking a pack a day? For 40 years, I've been smoking a pack a day of cigarettes. So she's asking him, well, how much did a pack of cigarettes cost 40 years ago? And how much does a pack of cigarettes cost now? So when you consider that how much money you've been spending every year on cigarettes with all this inflation, all these years, for 40 years, if you had just set that money aside, you could have a brand new Ferrari today. And the guy says, wow, isn't that interesting? And the guy says, do you smoke? And she says, no. And he says, where's your Ferrari? So I like
that. Sounds like something that might have really happened.
Yeah.
Where's your Ferrari?
So
I was thinking, who wants a Ferrari?
Yeah, right. Well,
I think I'd rather have a pack of cigarettes.
Well, if you're a smoker, you sure would.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was a smoker.
So Peter Schiff is a financial commentator, and here are a couple of minutes. And as you point out, his speaking style is so intense that
he's worse than we are.
You can only take a couple of minutes, but here he is.
Because he's got a really excellent point.
Yeah.
I want to just focus on one aspect of the State of the Union, and that is inflation. After taking credit for helping the economy grow with all the government spending programs, Biden then said that a lot of this is being undone by inflation, that inflation is robbing people of these gains, that Biden's economic policies really help the economy. They're creating jobs, they're causing wages to go up. So Biden took credit for all this good stuff, but then said that the good things that he was doing, people were being denied those benefits. They were being stolen by inflation, as if inflation had absolutely nothing to do with Biden's policies. You see, what Biden doesn't seem to understand is when the government spends money for whatever economic stimulus programs it wants, there is a cost. When the government runs a deficit, when the government doesn't pay for spending through taxation, if we just run deficits and the Fed prints the money, well, then the programs are paid for through inflation. The public is going to pay for government one way or the other, either directly through an honest tax or indirectly through a dishonest tax called inflation. So if Biden wants to claim credit for all this government spending, then he has to claim responsibility for all the inflation that was required to finance it. He can't pretend that he gave taxpayers all this great stuff, but then inflation came and stole it away from them. The inflation came from government. The government stole it. What the government gives with one hand, it takes with the other. So Biden, through the government spending programs, with one hand, reached out and gave taxpayers some money, and then with the other hand, he picked their back pocket through inflation to pay for it. So you can't say, I love all this government spending, but then pretend that the inflation that was a consequence of that government spending had absolutely nothing to do with that inflation. And that's why Biden is now trying to blame the inflation that he claims is robbing the taxpayers of all the good stuff that he's doing. He wants to blame it on greedy businesses, on businesses that are gouging their customers. It's the government, it's the Federal Reserve that's gouging businesses and consumers with inflation. But Biden is acting as if it's the free market. We don't have enough competition. We have too few companies. We got 4 companies that process beef, and supposedly all of a sudden they're colluding to drive up prices and they're gouging their customers. They're taking advantage of them. And Biden claims that the way he wants to fight inflation is by creating more competition and by lowering costs, which is so ridiculous because, first of all, one of the reasons that we don't have more competition is because of government. Government makes it harder for companies to survive and compete with other companies. All the regulations and all the taxes limit competition. So if you want more competition, we need less government, not more government. But the idea that the government is going to drive down costs, the government doesn't drive costs down, it drives costs up. Everything the government does increases the cost of business. I mean, any money the government spends has to be paid for by the private sector. So if Biden actually wants to reduce costs, he has to lower taxes. He can cut regulations because what government does with taxes and regulations is drive up costs. The only way they can bring those costs back down is to stop driving them up. So if they can lower the taxes that they've already imposed on businesses, if they can eliminate some of the regulations that they have already forced companies to comply with, then they could lower costs because the compliance costs of all those regulations, taxes that businesses are paying, they are passing those costs on to consumers.
Okay, so the first thing I want to mention about that tape, I just want to say one thing, is I'm so glad that someone's pointing out that fan dance. And of course, I was looking up fan dance and it turns out to be some kind of military exercise. But here's what I think a fan dance is. It's a burlesque tease. Biden is counting on people not understanding what causes inflation. I mean, he's counting on your stupidity to promote the idea that I'm innocent, and my accomplishments are being eaten up by inflation. And there's probably 25% of the audience that buys that bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, whenever you look at these polls, about 25% agree with these ridiculous ideas that are promoted by the socialists.
And I've been in touch with that lately. And I think 25% might be
I'm trying to figure it out. So somebody's like Biden does something horrible, and then they poll people, and about 25% like him anyway. They'll agree with some absurd idea. There's about 25% that will agree with an absurd idea, not do any rational thinking at all.
Well, I think it's in the category of we don't care if it's an absurd idea or not. So your 25% that you're talking about, I think might be kind of halfway accurate. And it's people who prefer that some central authority does something, even if it's wrong. They don't even seem to care whether it makes sense or not. If it feels nice and if the person seems to have good intentions, they're all in favor of it. And
well,
you can't convince them. I don't care how.
No, that's exactly right. You cannot convince a person whose belief system is guiding their judgment.
Right.
They're comfortably irrational. That is important. So for any topic, I mean, when we're not going to convince that 25%, I'm to that conclusion that 25% is just not going to be on the radar.
They not only will not be convinced, we have to accept that it will always be a core of 25% who affect the structure of our society.
Well, I think that's
important. And there will always
important.
be roughly 25% that's completely brain dead, crazy, the wrong solution to things.
Wow.
But you just can't get rid of
Well,
them.
Stanovich, who I'm reading now, Keith Stanovich, who's like a brilliant cognitive psychologist and a heavyweight in the area of decision making, he says his idea is it's about 20%. It's about 20%, and that 80% is not paying attention.
Yeah.
And so you have to get that group educated. So I agree with you on that our audience, being libertarians, we're in some kind of minority, but we have to accept that 25% is not going to listen under any conditions, and so we shouldn't try to influence that group.
So let's apply this concept to the concept of inflation. Now I am talking about Milton Friedman, because Milton Friedman says historically, he says the only cause of inflation is money supply.
Is money supply.
Is government-created supply of money. Mm-hmm. That when government starts monkeying around with how much money is out in printing money, that causes inflation every time. Now, there is a minor form of inflation, which is natural increase in productivity, but it's so small, it's inconsequential, we shouldn't even talk about it.
Because it's just a natural phenomenon.
It's just a natural phenomenon that doesn't hurt a thing.
In relationship to government.
It's a very good thing for people, for the economy in general to be more productive. That's a very good thing, but that's a very small amount of inflation. The real inflation that's a problem is when our government pumps money into the system.
Which they've been doing like crazy people.
Right. So Milton Friedman says it takes, when the government prints money, one way or another, it takes about 2 years for that money to make it through the system.
And to balance out and go back to homeostasis?
Well, I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, but it takes about 2 years. The first people to get the money profit the most, or get the benefit of it, are
they get uninflated.
The government and the banks and the big businesses, they get that inflated money first before inflation goes through our system. The people that get it last, of course, are the poor and disadvantaged people. By the time inflation works 2 years through the system, those people are really screwed because their wages have not gone up, but prices have gone up. So that's the way inflation works. And it takes 2 years, so you don't really quite catch on, how did this happen? And that's how they can pull that trick about greedy capitalists and all that sort of thing. Milton Friedman says historically, when countries do this, and he says it happens over and over again, it takes an inflation rate of about 20% before the population gets pissed off at their leaders and insists that their leaders do something about it. So there's a time lag. The population doesn't quite catch what's going on until inflation is so bad that they finally realize that their politicians don't know what they're doing, and they start insisting that something be done. And then Milton Friedman says there are a few things the government can do to fix it, and then it takes 5 years to fix it. But the things, I'll just say it real quick. You got to cut government spending, you got to limit the growth of money in your system, and you have to reduce regulations. You do those 3 things, spend 5 years keeping it under control, then you have inflation under control. And really, that's my point today.
Well, you're trying to point out the elements of inflation and how if we have a president who understand so little about what causes inflation. I mean, the question is, was Biden ignorant of what really causes inflation, or is he just lying and trying to be pro himself when he implied that he is not causing, that the administration, of course, they printed money under Trump.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
oh, no.
I don't know who's in charge of printing money, but they've been printing money. I mean, we have
This isn't
we
just
have
Biden.
a 30. Yeah, exactly. These crooks all do this. We have a national debt of almost $30 trillion.
That's right.
We have I'm speaking from a position of ignorance, but I think our gross national product is like 20 trillion. We have like 150%. I can look that up. I have that app. But we have a serious income to debt problem in the United States.
We do, and we are right at the level of that ratio that you're talking about of other countries historically have gone down the tubes because
Not all of them. Some of them.
No, not all of them. There are a lot of factors.
Yeah.
The confidence of your population, the confidence that the system is going to work has a lot to do with how they can abuse their debt compared to their gross domestic
This is interesting psychologically. Well, I was reading, I forget who it was. Maybe it was Jefferson or maybe it was Washington who said something about, in order to maintain a free functioning society, the population has to take on the role of making sure that it's informed.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me yesterday after this unpleasant talk. I got confronted for posting my feelings about the leadership in the Psychological Association. And I got confronted by one of the council members, and I came away from that just stunned by how little she knew about what I was talking about. So we have a population who doesn't understand, because how could you present the idea that, like Biden did, about inflation not being his problem, him causing the problem after printing, what did they print? $4 trillion? Anyway, they printed a bunch of money. How could you even present that idea? Because even I know that's ludicrous, him saying that. But yet he's presenting it in the State of the Union as if, hey, and I bet you if you took a poll and you asked people what causes inflation, 70%, 75% wouldn't know, maybe even 80%. I mean, that'd be an interesting item.
I'd almost be afraid to hear what a percentage of them think it's because of greedy businesses.
Well, but that would be a great, somebody's probably done that, because that'd be understanding the way things work is a problem in the United States of America right now. I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot, which, I mean, I don't claim to know much psychology, but what I've been dawning on me is how many young psychologists don't know anything about psychology and how silly everybody seems to be. I mean, we are going into some kind of ignorance that is very concerning to me.
Well, I might want to conclude with this concept, that the concept of the greedy business owner being the problem, and
with inflation, the greedy business owner is causing inflation, that concept?
Yeah.
Okay.
The whole idea behind free market economics is that it harnesses the whole concept of greed, that you want your businesses to be hard driving, competitive, trying to make as much money as they can. You don't want them to collude with government to make money. You want them to be in the marketplace, in the free market, providing services to people and make as much money as they can, pay as low a wage as they can possibly get away with. The free market system harnesses that so that all the players have a good balance of making money.
Yeah, you could say that freedom harnesses that, as
That's
long
right.
as there's no cheating. And you're suggesting that one of the biggest cheaters is government.
Well, and so that's the other side to this. If you don't harness greed with your free market, the alternative to that is to have some central decision maker or central authority like government deciding what's fair. And historically, when you look at that, those forms of government are complete failures compared to a free market system.
Yeah. Well, I would reference the Phil Donahue and Milton Friedman thing about the word greed, self-interest. And it's not greed, it's self-interest. And as long as it's not cheaters, harnessing self-interest is what human dynamics do. And so you can harness them correctly or you can screw them up.
Yeah. So I guess I'd like to conclude by saying that we can't change the 25% that are always going to think that the simple...
They're not going to think. They're not going to think. They're not making that decision by their cognitive processes.
And I'll even say that the government officials, the politicians, they don't even care. They don't even think about which one is the right.
The government officials,
system.
let's just say the bureaucrats, their self-interest is aligned with their self-interest.
That's right.
So they're not thinking rationally either.
The politicians are just winning elections, and I don't think they really give a crap about which system works better for the economy.
You're trying to conclude, but let me say that I think their integrity, their principles. I heard this really interesting comment the other day on that news station, International. She said something I thought that's profound. Self-interest trumps principle. So sometimes principle does guide people, but when their self-interest is ignited, you can forget the principle.
Okay. Well, that's a good way to put it.
I thought that's a profound statement about evolution of human being and problem solving. Okay.
That's a good way to put it. So here's my conclusion. We can't change that 25%. We can't change the politicians. They're not going to do what makes sense. They're going to do what serves them best. But it is important that we have a critical mass of our population that believes in the free marketplace.
That understands basics and believes in a free market.
Right. Compared or as opposed to centralized authorities. Centralized authorities are a disaster, but that's where that brain dead mind goes, is someone needs to do something about this. As soon as people start talking like that, you're implying, well, we need to give this to some great leader who
Somebody needs to do. Daddy and mommy need to do something about this.
And in a family of 4 or 5 people, that might work. But in a country or even a small group, it does not work to have centralized decision makers. It works much better to have individual choice. So that is the point of this episode, is keep our free market principles alive.